Hello and welcome to this CNBC TV18 GST special. Minister Nirmala Sitharaman in her budget speech said that a lot of measures need to be taken when it comes to the road ahead for GST. Post that last week, Revenue Secretary Tarun Bajaj also pitched for a major GST rate rejig. Tarun Bajaj said that several measures are yet to be taken for a better GST policy in the country, and the measures are work in progress. He further hinted at the fact that rejig would mean both reduction and hike in rates, as the government has to look at both the sides. He also said that this year the attempt will be to try and bring in those changes in the GST framework. And after that, only there can be some stability in the GST framework, especially when it comes to the industry, which has been saying that we need more stability. So, what could be these changes and what is the rationale behind these measures? Do we really need a rate rejig or not? Is something that we are here to discuss. And today I'm joined by MS Money partner Deloitte India, Abhishek Rastogi, partner at Khaitan and Co., and former CBIC chairman Najib Shah. A very warm welcome to all of you, sir. Noting such remarks from the key policy makers when it comes to GST, what do you think? Do we really need a rate rejig? Coming to you first, Mr. Shah, do you really feel that there is a requirement because you were one of the key architects of this framework?
Thank you for having me, Timsy. Convergence of rates has always been the avowed goal of GST.
Hmm.
The goal was also to have as minimum rates as possible. As you're well aware, when we
Hmm.
started off, we had multiplicity of rates because of multiple reasons, which at that point of time were essential.
Hmm.
Now that we are well into GST having stabilized considerably, there is perhaps a need for starting to look at the process of such convergence, which means rejigging, like you have mentioned,
Hmm.
and which is why the GOM, headed by the CM Karnataka, is is examining all these issues. So rejig would mean, in my opinion, like you pointed out, what the Revenue Secretary had mentioned, some rates going up, some rates going down, correction of the inverted duty structure,
Hmm.
and also, I really sincerely hope that they look at expanding the base by bringing in products from the petroleum basket, which can easily be accepted by the industry. I specifically refer to ATF because that's another essential move which needs to happen. So, yes, from a policy perspective, a rejig is necessary. A rejig towards convergence is necessary. A rejig involving correction of inversion, expansion of the tax base is necessary.
Hmm.
We will discuss about the timing part of it later separately.
Coming to you, MS Money, do you really think the industry is ready for another round of rate revision? Are they happy to accept this rate revision?
See, if the
Since you have
rate
a lot of
revision,
investment plans.
yeah. So if the rate revision helps industry, I'm sure they would, welcome it,
Hmm.
because GST is going to complete its fifth anniversary soon.
Hmm.
So it's no longer an infant. It's crossed even the stage of being an adolescent, and I would say it's kind of now getting into more of stabilization. So when we get into a stabilization phase, if I look at it from an industry perspective, the expectation would be let us have more certainty in terms of what are the rates and what is the time limit for those rates. Let's not keep changing rates every 6 months or every year. That becomes very difficult for industry to handle, mainly because unlike many other taxes, GST is a tax whose value is embedded in the price of the final product or the service. And
Hmm.
therefore, at a customer level, the customer never sees GST. The customer only sees the price of the product. And
Hmm.
the process of embedding it requires a lot of calculations, computations, sales policies, marketing policies. There are various aspects linked to GST which are not taxation related. Consequently, if industry as a whole has more certainty by saying, look, these are the three rates or two rates or two and a half rates that we
Hmm.
are going to live it for the next 3 years, they can do their pricing, marketing, IT, everything on that parameter. So to me, more than a rate jig, it is a certainty of what are going to be the rates for the next 3 years that industry would be looking forward to.
So you think that after this rate revision, there will be more certainty and government will avoid any more changes? Because constantly we've been seeing changes after every 3 or 6 months, and at least in a year's time, we are seeing changes.
Yeah, so to be fair, some of those changes were necessary because, I mean, like everybody else, our country also went into GST, and you don't have an experience of doing GST.
Hmm.
So you learn, as you go along. So many of those changes, to my mind, were actually needed. So they went ahead. So to that extent, we should be thanking the government because they have been very, very quick in making the changes when industry has sought for it. That goes for them. But now we are getting into a phase where the rates are largely stable. Most businesses have awareness of what is the GST rate that impacts them. Most businesses also have done a computation of their input tax credits. So they know
Okay.
what is the input tax credit flow that
Hmm.
comes, so they can decide their costing and pricing. So at this stage, if we do a rate rejig, it's certainly
Hmm.
welcome. But we should also be having a commitment together with it that barring unforeseen situations, we'll
Hmm.
continue it for the next 2 years or 3 years or so.
Okay. What about you, Abhishek Rastogi? Do you think too many rate rejigs are healthy for the system, especially from the litigation point of view? Because you're contesting a lot of cases from the industry side where a lot of these matters are sub judice right now, especially when it comes to anti-profiteering.
Yeah. So, Timsy, I feel rate rationalization at this stage is inevitable for three reasons. One, the finance minister will have to consider tax buoyancy, and she intends to improve tax buoyancy at any cost. That is one.
Hmm. Hmm.
Second, of course, is the dispute resolution, which must happen. We have seen how more than 250 classification cases have gone to advanced ruling. And what has
Hmm.
happened in those cases because of an absence of a judicial member.
Hmm.
So I think disputes around classification will continue to happen. But I think North Block has somewhere realized that 15% of the items today are at 12% and 42% of the items are at 18%. And
Hmm.
this 57% items contribute or lead to most of the disputes in one basket,
Hmm.
whereas 15% of the exempted items and 25% of the items at 5%, those
Hmm.
40% of the disputes are with respect to the exemption and the 5% rate. So
Hmm.
I think what rationalization will do, rationalization will not only trim down the exemptions so as to
Hmm.
improve the tax buoyancy, which we want to improve for sure, but at the same time, it will reduce these disputes between the 5% and the exempted category, which constitute 40% of these supplies of goods, and
Okay.
between 57% of those categories which today fall in 12% and 18%, and which is a fairly high number. Now, if rate rationalization happens at any level,
Hmm.
significant
Hmm.
amount of classification disputes would come down. So
Hmm.
whether you trim down the exemptions and move products to 5%, the disputes would come down. Or
Hmm.
you have a mean rate of 16% or 15%. For these
Hmm.
two classifications, the disputes will come down. Now, if we see the World Bank report, they have very categorically said that India is one of those five countries which has more than four rates, four or more
Hmm.
than four rates.
Hmm.
And we are in that category, whereas 50%, 50 countries are only at a single rate and 30 countries in dual rate. So clearly, I think the government also intends
Single
to
rate is definitely not coming in right now
not
because
coming,
we are
not coming in
already
for sure.
having too many rates,
Absolutely,
and it
absolutely,
becomes tough
absolutely.
to
Single,
converge at least these into, if we cut down the four slabs into three, that itself is a huge challenge that we are seeing. We've been
absolutely,
working on this task for more than 3 years now. Mr. Shah would like to correct me if I'm wrong, because that too many rates is definitely that India is going to continue with for at least 3 to 4 years, not
that's right.
below that we are going to see that there will be a single rate. We are too far from a single rate regime.
Absolutely, but I think what Mani said made a lot of sense that too much of this change. But I
Hmm.
don't think rate rationalization can be skipped at this stage. But I think in terms of the number of notifications, circulars, and the orders which have issued, has also given sort of a very dynamic changing environment for industry. So of
Hmm.
course, rate rationalization is one. which I think would be good if it leads to reduction in classification disputes,
Hmm.
must be
Hmm.
on the cards, and I think we must move towards that. But I think
Hmm.
at the same time, when this rate rationalization is happening, we must have a clear need to have appropriate clarifications so that these rejigs in the rate is not leading to further disputes.
Hmm. I take that point because even money is looking for that we should have some clarity as to these rates after this sort of a revision. Till when will they be static, to be precise, or will they stay as it is? Another thought behind rate rejig is revenue neutrality. According to government data, revenue neutral rate was 15.3, but right now the revenue neutral rate that the government is getting is around 11.6. So that is another reason, or that huge gap is one reason behind this. What do you make of this, Najib Shah? You were one of the key players at that time when rates were getting decided too. So what do you think revenue neutrality has to play here? Because 15.3 and 11.6 is a huge gap.
Look, from a tax administrator's point of view, we would
Hmm.
like to have just a single rate. Obviously, it
Hmm.
is simply not possible. It's not going to happen. So
Hmm.
the next alternative was to have as few rates as possible.
Hmm.
And the journey of GST from 2017 till now has seen
Hmm.
just so many reduction in rates that the average rate has reduced now to 11 odd, as against a desired rate for ensuring that we get a steady revenue, which
Hmm.
is more towards 16. Therefore, we have a problem in our hands. The fact that GST revenue has been doing well for the last few months, touching this 1.41 lakh crores the last month, has been a combination of factors, including better compliance and enforcement.
Hmm.
But going forward, we really need to look at how we are going to bring these rates to as close as possible towards a standard rate of around 15 to 16. Because remember, the last month's, the
Hmm.
December's IIP data, which has come out in last a couple of days back, shows that things are not so good.
Hmm.
So going forward, revenue is going to be a challenge. The none of our major sectors have really done well. So I fear that February's revenue may not be as good as the previous month's revenue was. Therefore, the point which is being made by Mr. Rastogi about reduction in litigation as a result of rejigging will be a
Hmm.
natural consequence. The lesser the rates, the lesser the disputes, the lesser the challenges about where my product should be classified,
Hmm.
classification
Hmm.
issues will get sorted out. And yes, the
Hmm.
point made by Mr. Money about certainty should also be addressed. I think sometime earlier he had in another show where I was also there mentioned that ideally it should be from the first of the financial year. That's a very, very valid point. And unless and until we have an emergency or a critical situation like COVID, we should not really be touching the rates in between fiscal years so that the industry also plans and the department also knows exactly the projections of revenue which you can possibly get.
Hmm. Hmm. Staying with that thought of that in future, at least in a few months coming from now, the revenue might not be as buoyant as what we are seeing. And as you rightly said, the IIP data is not looking that healthy. Also, inflation was one red flag that we heard from Finance Minister in her budget, and also a caution coming in from the industry given the increased input costs, increased cost of raw materials. So, do you think that at a time when we are looking at risks from inflation, at a time when we are looking at risks from higher input costs for the industry, especially for the manufacturing sector, raw materials are costing higher as compared to earlier? Do you think that maybe better enforcement, and better compliance should continue as the way forward instead of revising the rates, which, as you rightly said, since from a tax administration's point of view, hiking the rate will be more sort of a looked at opportunity because we are not at the revenue neutral rate. Despite that, we are getting good revenues. So why not only tinker with areas which do not bother you much, such as, say, better enforcement and better compliance to avoid leakages instead of going for a rate hike when we see inflation, increased raw material costs, hampering the economy and overall causing a disruption. What do you feel, Mr. Shah?
Look, there's never a good time for a rate rejig. At any given point of time, you're going to have a challenge,
I agree. I agree.
right?
There's never a good time.
So there's never a good time. Now, if we can prepare the industry well in advance, if the
Hmm.
rejig does not happen and it says from Monday onwards they're going to hike the rates,
Yeah.
but we tell them clearly 2 months down the line this is what is going to happen. I think we need to do that. We can't not bite the bullet.
Hmm.
So we need to do that. We need to do it slowly and steadily, taking the industry into confidence so that they have time to react to these changes, so that distortions, if any, which can creep in any sort of a rate rejig, gets corrected. So
Hmm.
there is going to be a challenge, but I think we need to start the process forward. We can't keep not postponing it. There's never going to be a good time.
I agree. There's never going to be a good time for rate rejig. But what do you think, Mani? How do you see revenue neutrality as a reason behind pushing and pulling the rates, also keeping in mind inflation and input costs? And not to forget, when it comes to that, we need to bite this bullet, as Mr. Shah said, that we need to bite this bullet sooner or later. So it's better that we do it sooner, given that this entire GOM process has been delaying. Earlier, this was headed by Sushil Modi. Then he was no longer in the cabinet of Bihar, so we shifted it to Karnataka. And now even Karnataka panel, to be precise, the Bomoi panel has also taken some 6 7 months already. It was last September, to be precise, when the panel was redrafted, given the new changes in the composition. And again, the report is still pending, and I feel it is not going to come even by end of February, which was the deadline given by Finance Minister in her last council meeting. I think the panel is going to take at least March. So what do you think, Mani, about these push and pulls on the rates?
Okay, so one thing which is very counterintuitive, Timsy, is the fact
Hmm.
that when you mentioned inflation and when you
Hmm.
mentioned collections in the same breath, we have to
Hmm.
bear in mind that because of inflation, also the collections are improving because it's a tax which is based on the value.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now, if you look at the GST data, the collections data for the last few months, one of the notable items is that the IGST on imports has been going up.
That's
And
true.
that is
That's
because commodity prices and other import prices have gone
Hmm.
up, and therefore the GST collections have also gone up. Same
Hmm.
is the story in respect of the domestic supplies. Because with inflation increasing, the GST collections will also go up.
Hmm.
Now, what is the proportion of the increase in GST collections on account of inflation, and what is the collection on the basis of the same volume? I
Hmm.
don't think any one of us has seen data on that.
Hmm.
Now, if we talk of your specific question, should we just keep the rates as they are, and should we
Hmm.
just focus on better compliance and enforcement? I guess both need to go hand in hand.
Hmm.
And while we have to bear in mind that frequent changes are not what industry would want, at the same time, we shouldn't be closing our eyes to a change when it is necessary to do that change. We
Okay.
have to build in some flexibility also into the system so
Hmm.
that when required, we are able to flex the rates. It
Hmm.
would be ideal if these are announced 3 months, 6 months in advance and are made effective from 1st of April. That would be the ideal scenario. Now, having said that, there also needs to be a window open that if there is a particular industry, if there is a
Hmm.
particular sector which
Hmm.
requires immediate attention, we should also be able to act on it within a month or within 2 months or so.
Hmm.
So we
Hmm.
have to build in certainty, and we should certainly build in certainty, but we should also certainly build in flexibility so that when required, we are able to act. So in the initial period of GST, the
Hmm.
GST Council in many cases has acted with a lot of flexibility and they have acted when required. Now, did that cause challenges to business? Yes, it did cause challenges to business. But did the benefits of the rate change overweigh the difficulties? I think that is a matter of debate which will vary across the sector and across
Very true.
companies.
Very true. Very true. It will vary
Right?
across sectors.
The key point over here to which I would like to reiterate is look,
Hmm.
GST rates and changes in GST rates are
Hmm.
not merely a classification issue and are not merely a tax related issue. It
Okay.
affects the entire ecosystem of an organization, from the purchase orders and sales orders and from the procure to pay systems till the
Hmm.
receivables and till the billing and till the IT systems. There's a very long process chain which gets impacted every time one rate for one product undergoes change. We
So that
have to
is
be
why you
cognizant
feel
of
that
that and therefore keep this to
industries
the
need
minimum.
time. That is why you feel that industry needs time so that they can
Exactly.
adjust the back end.
Exactly.
There should be time given to the back end as well to readjust to the rates to avoid any confusion, or for that matter what we saw immediately after the rates were revised for, say, restaurants, etc. There were so many anti-profiteering cases because overnight the restaurants, the FMC sector could not revise their rates, and it the entire debate landed up in courts when it comes to the HUL case, when it comes to the McDonald's case or Subway case, to be precise. So you feel that there should be some window given to the back end as well.
Exactly. To that extent, it may not be a bad idea to bring back the GST rate hike only back to the union budget, because
Hmm.
then on 1st of February, the rates can be announced and they can be made effective from 1st of April. So,
Hmm.
to that extent, in a very limited way, rate
Hmm.
hikes can actually now come back to union budget.
Hmm. What about you, Abhishek? Your comments, especially keeping in mind the litigation point, as Mani was saying that backends need time to adjust. Rate rejigs are welcome, but it should not be overnight. There should be some time window given for the industry to adjust, and that government policymakers need to understand to give that much of a window. Because normally, what we see is maximum a week's time has been given in the past, as soon as the new rates are announced.
Right. I think these are important aspects. If you see the even the advanced ruling authorities today,
Hmm.
they are getting 50% more cases with respect to classification disputes. So, which means that classification will remain a subject matter of debate, discussion, and litigation.
Hmm.
Today, at the same time, we do not have tribunals. So, even if the matter goes to the jurisdictional commissioners, there is less certainty of what will happen at the initial stage, because these quasi judicial authorities, we know for a fact, are tilted more towards revenue.
Hmm.
There are adverse orders as far as the taxes are concerned. But I think I would again reiterate that these rate rationalization is must, also keeping in mind the global perspective. We've seen that this harmonized system of nomenclature, the rates have been rejigged by the seventh edition, 2022 edition, and there are 351 amendments which have happened in different sectors: agriculture, chemical, machinery, wood sector, base metal, transport sector, and textiles, and several
Hmm.
other sectors. So I think
Hmm.
India is also very cautious of the fact that at the global chart, we must meet all the important criterias which are relevant for us today. So we cannot ignore HSN. Of course, HSN will have lesser aspect with respect to when it comes to the GST rates, but when it comes to the customs duty and the IGST, that may have far-reaching implications. And today, as a country, as a nation, we cannot ignore the HSN seventh edition and these 351 amendments. So certainly these changes are bound to happen. Uh, and Timsy, yes, you touched upon the anti-profiteering, which is now extended till November of 22. And if all
Hmm.
of these rate changes now happen now or in April or in June or whenever, the rate rationalization will also lead to anti-profiteering disputes. So I think on one side there'll be rate rationalization. We are talking about reducing disputes, getting
Hmm.
more tax certainty. But at the
Hmm.
same time, the rationalization, if it happens between the 12 and the 18, lot of
Hmm.
commodities, and I mentioned earlier that 15% of the commodities are at 12% rate. So all of those 15% will then be subjected to anti-profiteering. And we know for a fact that today anti-profiteering authorities, anti-profiting guidelines do not have a
Hmm.
methodology. There are no methodology. There are no guidelines. So what do we do? What would the industry do?
No,
So
no.
I think
I
those are
also feel
important
that
aspects.
if rates are revised, then the anti-profiteering window will also get extended by, say, another year or so, because
Yes. We'll
government
be in
and
business though.
policymakers will have to keep in mind the connect that consumer has from GST, because
Absolutely.
consumer also needs to be protected from being fooled by the industry. That's the entire idea behind anti-profiteering, to
So
put
I
it in
think
simple terms.
absolutely
So
no.
when
So
we come
Timsy,
to
you're
the
absolutely right? I just want to make one point. Today,
Hmm.
industry is not shying away from passing this benefit to the consumer. Please don't take me wrong. We are not
Hmm.
shying away. But
Hmm.
if we do not have a mechanism to compute the quantum of profiteering, because there are no rules to do that, how would
Hmm.
one do that? And these results, the orders of anti-profiteering authority are leading to absolutely inconsistent views and results and percentages and formulas. So I
Hmm.
think the industry faces that as a trauma.
But for anti-profiteering, there are very strict guidelines. There are investigations. We have a DJ anti-profiteering mechanism, right, Mr. Shah? They look
But
into
nothing on how
all
to
the
determine the
aspects
quantum
of
of profiteering.
investigating. Uh, See, quantum of profiteering is something that we, based on one or two complaints, is when action is taken. Please understand that not every consumer will approach the government that he has been charged more. We need to respect that as well, that consumers shy away from going to a consumer court or reaching out to the right platform. So we don't know how much of quantum of money even the industry has made, because not everyone will land up with a complaint. So when it comes to quantum, that is something which is debatable, I agree. But we also need to respect the consumers aspect over here. Consumers get charged more. I mean, how many of you yourself go and look at a bill that you've paid, that yes, it was supposed to be charged at X particular rate and we paid rather 18 instead of being paying 12. So we must respect that as well, that not every consumer has that much of an awareness, and that can be created for that matter. There are so many cases landing up also in the consumer courts, where people are not even aware that they should reach out to the GST anti-profiteering mechanism, and they should not land up to consumer courts, which is under Consumer Affairs Ministry. So, I mean, we need to give that much of a leeway to the consumer as well. But this apart, so what about the GOM that has been constituted? They have been looking at various proposals of rate rationalization. So, what, according to you, Najib Shah, should be ideal key rates that this particular committee should actually debate upon? There was an idea to move 5% to 8%, or maybe 7%, and moving the 18% bracket to 20%, because, as Abhishek was pointing out, majority of commodities, goods are at 5%, and majority of services are at 18%. So do you think tinkering with these two slabs per se, Mr. Shah, would actually yield in revenue neutrality and not push the burden on consumers' pocket?
No, yeah, it is easier said than done, because I think the GM's job is extremely unenviable, because there are going to be no winners in this at all. I mean, whatever they do, they're going to be badly lambasted by all concerned. The
Hmm.
department who feel they can do better, the industry who feels that grave injustice has been done to them. Having said that, I do believe that the move has to be gradual. We
Hmm.
have to look at the exemptions. A
Hmm.
lot of exemption cleaning will be a way forward, not only from the point of view of rationalization, but from the
Hmm.
point of view of the basic core concept of GST. That is that there should be a tax on value addition, and every exemption breaks the chain and adds to the cost, as it were. Therefore, they should look very closely at exemptions. The 5% rate is going to be a very, very sensitive rate, because the
Exactly.
commodities which are there
Yes.
are commodities which are basic commodities for the average common man. So
Hmm.
any move of the 5% towards 7, 8 is going to be politically very difficult. I
Hmm.
think it will not happen very easily. And I mean, I know that at the time of our rate fixation also, we had debated a lot on these aspects. So I think moving 5 towards 7, 8, which is what one of the papers of the National
Which is
Institute of Public
exactly
Finance.
exactly this is the reason why I asked you this question, because
Yes,
5 and 18 both are consumer sensitive brackets. You
absolutely.
pay all your services at 18, and you pay all your basic goods consumption rate at 5%. So your food commodities like your bread, butter, etc., they get impacted with 5%, and your basic bills, electricity, mobile, etc., they get impacted on the 18%. So you think that it will be more of a political call that the government will have to take if they move these two brackets per se, and from a tax administration's point of view? Do you think these two are the most tax yielding brackets also?
5% shifting, the 5% will be an entirely political call.
Hmm.
It was always so.
Hmm.
Economics has nothing to play with that.
Hmm.
So it will be a political call there. 12 and 18 will be more a call where the tax administrator will be more intimately involved rather than the GOM itself. I mean, they will go
Hmm.
by that point of the tax
Hmm.
administrators. So I think
Hmm.
between 12 and 18, there's a lot of play
Hmm.
which can happen. And ideally, if a lot of bundling can be done there,
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
also make a huge step forward.
Hmm. So that seems to be a good idea even for the GOM, Mr. Shah, to consider when it comes to what should they actually now discuss upon, because right now the main discussion on rates is still open. Rather, what I gather from my sources is that it has not even started. It
Yes.
was just a proposal thrown by the fitment committee members who are also members of this GOM, and this discussion could not happen at all. They were
Yes.
about to meet and they could not meet for that particular meeting. What about you, Mani? What will be your suggestion to the GOM?
Look, first and foremost is I would at any point of time say that if rate increases are required, let's
Hmm.
get them over and done with. Let's not worry
Hmm.
too much about what's
Hmm.
going to happen and what it will lead to, because the
Hmm.
people on the GOM, to my mind, are best equipped to decide what should be the rate.
Hmm.
So, whatever be the rate, if 18 moves to 20, let's get and done with it. But then let's
Hmm.
have certainty by saying next 2 years we are not going to touch 20 unless something unforeseen,
Hmm.
God forbid, happens.
Hmm.
Let's stick to that. One of the issues we have to bear in mind, which is causing a significant amount of distress to businesses and industry as a whole, is the
Hmm.
continuance and extension of anti-profiteering authority. Look, while from the consumer side there is very good justification for an anti-profiteering authority, and they are
Hmm.
supposed to get into the pricing to see whether benefits have been passed on, we have to
Hmm.
bear in mind that when this was set up originally, when it was part of the legislation, we were
Hmm.
moving from two, three, five, six taxes to one tax.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
this was set up essentially to check at that point of time
Hmm.
where the benefits of the lower rates and where the benefits of increased input tax credits being passed on to the consumer. Now we are now reaching 5 years of GST.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, is anti-profiteering authority going to be a perpetual body? Because we
Hmm.
will keep having rate changes as we go along. Because of changes in supply chain, value chain, technology, new products, new rates will keep coming. Some new
Hmm.
products will come. Some classification disputes will certainly occur.
Hmm. Hmm.
But broadly, do we believe that the market forces overall today, in an
Hmm.
economy of our size, we are close to a 3 trillion economy now? So, in
Hmm.
an
Hmm.
economy of our size and muscle, aren't the market forces enough to take care of the pricing of products and services? Should the demand and supply patterns not be able to take care of it? Do we really need an anti-profiting authority to regulate that? That is something I think which needs a relook, and that is something possibly the rate
Hmm.
fixation committee may have provided suggestions on.
I have a different point of view here, Mani, because when it comes to the consumer, for that matter, even tax administration would agree with it that the consumer is the king. And when it comes to tax rates, consumers' interest needs to be protected. When you say that demand and supply patterns should take care of it, well, we have also seen cartelization amongst industries, and they do not pass on this rate benefit. So we also need to keep in mind that industry, the various companies providing or supplying or manufacturing one particular good, they form a cartel and they do not extend these benefits. So when it comes to the MRP, for that matter, where, as you rightly said, that GST is embedded in the MRP, if the MRPs don't reduce, how do we consumers and how does the tax administration get to know that yes, the benefit has been passed on or not? or whether, say, X company launches, say, a branded pack of atta for, say, 300 rupees, whereas the other will launch it at 250. I doubt that happens. It is more of a cartel that the industry forms. So we must also need to take care of that when you say that we are close to $3 trillion economy, and we with that muscle we should leave it open. But then industry needs to own up the responsibility too, which they do not. So that is one aspect that I feel industry should look into when they demand for something like this, that anti-profiteering authorities should not be there. With the rate certainty, they also need to get a certainty at the back of their mind when it comes to litigation. But then they need to own it up as well. That is something that I feel, and I feel Mr. Shah would agree with me. What about you, Mr. Shah? Do you feel that, because you've been a tax administration from the enforcement side as well for quite a long tenure, and you have investigated various matters on that front too?
Look, anti-profiteering, when we conceived it,
Hmm,
it was a lot of internal debate and discussion,
hmm,
because we were more than certain that the industry will not be happy
hmm,
with an anti-profiteering sort of an authority,
hmm,
which in effect questions their pricing and their
hmm,
and the
hmm,
cost process.
hmm,
Therefore, hence it was conceived to be having a shorter timeline,
hmm,
a life itself. But yes, it has been extended repeatedly. But I
hmm,
believe that the test of anti-profiteering ultimately will be how their orders withstand judicial scrutiny,
hmm,
number one. Number two, how the number of cases coming to them will keep reducing, because industry would have by then realized that, look, it is best to ensure that they're transparent in the passing on of the credit flow and the benefits to the consumer. And once
has
that
to be
starts happening, the reason for an anti-profiting authority will cease to exist. I hope
done.
that happens sooner rather than later.
Abhishek, what about you? In your areas of concern, what do you think the GOM should address, especially keeping all this entire discussion in mind, which would land up in courts only?
Yeah, Timsy. So I feel that I think GOM must keep in mind that, and I'm sure they would have this in mind, is that
Hmm,
18% tax rate is also a sensitive rate,
hmm,
because 65% of the taxable turnover value falls in that
hmm,
rate. So
hmm,
any change to 18% will have the most significant impact on the tax buoyancy. So whether
hmm,
you rationalize that, or
hmm,
whether you increase or decrease, and for that matter, even the disputes from our perspective. So I think any change to the 18% rate has that significance in terms of the total quantum of value of taxable value.
hmm, hmm,
Second point is, Timsi, is that when at the time of inception of GST, there were
hmm,
about 19% of the items which were there in 28%. And of course, there
hmm,
was a lot of hue and cry. And that list got trimmed down over the period of time for different
hmm.
reasons. Should
Yes.
GOM now consider to at least put luxury goods or services in that 28% category, or should there be some shift from 18 to 28%? Perhaps they may think as well.
Hmm,
Last, I think, is on some key critical sectors for
hmm,
which the decision is pending. So, for instance, casinos, online gamings. And I'm
hmm,
not talking about the food, textile, and footwear, because we have spoken a lot about that. But today, the matters have gone to the court, and there were coercive recoveries for certain of these sectors,
hmm,
wherein these reports from the GOM, specially constituted bodies, are
hmm,
pending. So I
hmm,
think that must be expedited, because that will give more tax certainty. Because now what happens is, if the report is negative and the tax rate, because of the rate or due to the valuation, is at a higher end, then
hmm.
there'll be consequential effect of interest and penalties. And the more delay, the more burden.
I agree. This discussion is endless, is what I feel. But since we are running out of time, thank you, gentlemen, for being part of this discussion. Let's see what finally the GOM or the GST Council does when it comes to the decision on the future course of action on rates. Will the rates go up, or will they go down, by how much is something that we'll have to wait and watch. Many thanks for watching. Stay there, as we will be right back with a lot more on the other side.
Thanks, Timsi.
Thank you.